Hi, and welcome back to Recurring Insight. I'm re-recording this intro after Cedric said the last one didn't have enough personality to it, which is an extremely crappy thing to say about someone who's just talking. Anyhow, today we're going to be doing Cabal Therapy, an iconic magic design, and something that just sort of shows that you don't just like grade designs on like a 0 to 100 or an A to F. There are elements of designs that can be really good, and inside the same designs, elements that are really bad. Cabal Therapy, a great example of this, so tune in.
So from my perspective, Cabal Therapy has some really intense parts of the design that are really good and parts that are really rough. The top of the list in terms of compliments is that I think it's perhaps the most novel execution of flashback in the history of Magic. A big problem that flashback has as a mechanic is that it's repetitive. You're casting the same spell twice. It's really hard to avoid repetition unless you price the flashback in such a way that it doesn't happen that frequently. The nature of Cabal Therapy is that it's really not repetitive. One, because the act of flashback naturally is going to be different. You're going to be naming a different card, and the card you name is going to be informed by what happened the first time you cast it. And second, the flashback is not just mana. It's sacrificing a creature, which is intrinsically going to be less repetitive than just spending mana. You might not have a creature to work with in the first place, or the creature that you do have may be more valuable on the battlefield doing other stuff than flashing back a Cabal Therapy. So in terms of an execution of flashback that avoids a lot of the pitfalls of flashback, Cabal Therapy, I would guess, is the best execution in Magic's history. Unfortunately, there's some really serious downsides with this card. Top of the list for me is just way too hostile to people who have happened to draw 2 or more copies of the same card. I think you could talk me into a version of Cabal Therapy that was kind of capped at just, one card. As it stands, I think this is just too punishing for random events. Now, not all of those acts of punishing are necessarily bad. Legion Zen has a little bit of that too, where you get punished for how your opening hand is constituted. And you don't really have a lot of agency on how to play around it, because if you play one thing and hold something back, you still get cleared out. That said, being hostile towards cheap creatures, I think, is something that's valuable for Magic to have. Cheap creatures are overrepresented, I would say, broadly in competitive decks. And it's not with zero agency, right? Like if you draw 2 copies of a 1-drop and 1 copy of another one, you play the one of if you're playing around Legion's End. Cabal Therapy, because it gets everything, and because it's a 1-mana spell, there's really no opportunity for the opposing player to mitigate having just randomly drawn 2 or more copies of a card in their hand. Lastly, I think that Cabal Therapy is just a shade too burdensome for the opposing player to play around. The fact that you have to track, not only is there a Cabal Therapy in the graveyard, and flashback and mechanics like that do foist a burden onto the opposing player, I have to keep track of the cards that my opponent knows about from previous Cabal Therapies and how that informs everything. So I think that the opposing player is regularly put in a position where there's just sort of an undue burden on them to be paying attention to a number of different things, and no requirement for the player with Cabal Therapy in their graveyard to act until it's profitable for them to do so. That said, there's a ton of skill with the card, there's a lot of guessing, there's a lot of bluffing that goes on with it, and it's not surprising to me that Cabal Therapy remains beloved among competitive audiences that play older formats.
So that was Cabal Therapy, and again, this is Recurring Insight. A couple things you can do from here. If you're not subscribed already, become one of over 175,000, I believe, subscribers over at the Sarsi Games YouTube page. Throw a like up here if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't, because that will give me leverage in asking for more money from Cedric sometime in the near future. And make sure to tune in next time. We'll be talking about a certain iconic blue spell. People are going to want to turn in, especially those of you who hate when your opponent takes game actions.